Welcome to the deep dive. If your dog growls at you, your absolute first instinct is probably to punish them, right?
Oh, yeah, completely.
Like you just want to shut it down immediately, assert dominance, make sure they know who's in charge.
Right, because we're basically conditioned from childhood to think that stopping a growl is, the only way to prevent a bite.
Exactly. But what if the actual science of psychology says that punishing a growling dog is like the most dangerous thing you can do?
It really is.
Right. So today, we are looking at why everything you thought you knew about managing your pet's behavior might be fundamentally backward.
Yeah, it completely flips the traditional script on how we handle animals. I mean, for generations, the human-animal dynamic was strictly logistical.
Like it was just management.
Exactly, management. You provided kibble, you provided a warm place to sleep in the mudroom, and you ensured the animal didn't destroy the house.
Right. It was entirely about logistics and compliance.
But if you walk into a typical home today, the dog has a dedicated spot on the sofa.
Oh, or the cat has this elaborate floor-to-ceiling vertical playground.
Totally. And people are calling themselves pet parents. And that shift from manager to parent, it isn't just a cute change in vocabulary.
No, it's huge.
Right. Parenting is about psychology. It's about shaping a mind and fostering this complex, two-way relationship.
Which brings us to the core of our discussion today. We are pulling from this incredibly detailed piece in Psychology Today by Dr. Zazie Todd. It's titled, "What is Your Pet Parenting Style?"
It's such a great article.
It really is.
Oh, good.
And it synthesizes some groundbreaking scientific studies that ask a pretty wild question. Can the psychological frameworks we've used for decades to evaluate how humans raise children be applied directly to our cats and dogs?
And the short answer is yes.
Yeah. So the mission here is to help you identify your specific pet parenting style, because understanding the invisible psychological architecture of your daily interactions can completely change your relationship with your furry best friend.
For sure.
Right.
But to even begin mapping that out, we have to start with the baseline of human developmental psychology. Okay, lay it on us.
So when clinicians evaluate how a parent raises a child, they don't just look at individual rules in a vacuum. They measure the parent's overall approach on two primary dimensions.
Right.
The first dimension is demandingness.
Demandingness.
Yeah.
Which sounds a little intense, but it isn't a negative trait.
No, not at all. It essentially measures expectations. Like, does the parent set consistent rules? Do they maintain clear standards for behavior?
Are there firm boundaries in the household? That sort of thing.
Exactly. It's really just a clinical term for structure, because without it,
You just have chaos.
total chaos. Now, the second dimension balances that out. It's called responsiveness.
Okay.
This measures the parent's warmth, their affection, and, their attunement to the child's individual needs.
Like when a child is struggling, does the parent actually listen?
Right. Do they offer comfort and adjust their approach based on what the child is experiencing?
Right.
And when you cross those two dimensions, demandingness and responsiveness, you start to see very distinct parenting styles emerge. And in human psychology, there is a widely accepted gold standard, right?
Yes. It's known as the authoritative parenting style.
Authoritative, which means it combines high demandingness with high responsiveness.
Exactly. An authoritative parent maintains very clear rules and expectations. The boundaries absolutely exist.
But they enforce those boundaries with high responsiveness.
Right. They give the child choices whenever it is safe and responsible to do so. They take the time to explain the reasoning behind a rule, and they lead with empathy.
So the structure is maintained through communication rather than just brute force.
Exactly.
I always think of the authoritative style like a really good, tough but fair athletic coach.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. Like we've all had one. They expect you to show up at 6 a.m. They make you run wind sprints. They push you to absolute physical limits.
Yep.
But if you tweak your hamstring, they are the first one out there with an ice pack, asking how you feel and, modifying the drill so you don't permanently injure yourself.
Because they push you relentlessly, but they genuinely care about your long-term success and well-being.
Exactly.
Now, that contrasts sharply with another style that sounds very similar but yields completely different results.
Yeah.
And that is the authoritarian style.
Ah, authoritarian.
Right. Authoritarian parenting retains that high demandingness. So you have all the rules, all the strict expectations, but it has incredibly low responsiveness.
Oh.
Yeah. The focus is exclusively on immediate obedience and compliance, with essentially zero regard for the child's emotional state.
So Sticking with the analogy, the authoritarian style is like a dictator boss.
Oh, totally.
They just slam a folder on your desk and yell, "Hit your quota by Friday. I don't care that your computer is broken. Figure it out or you're fired."
Yep, there's no warmth, no support.
Just a rigid demand for output.
This raises an important question, though. If the gold standard authoritative style relies so heavily on reasoning with the child, explaining the why behind the rules, and fostering open dialogue,
Yeah,
how on earth do we apply this framework to an animal?
that is the million-dollar question.
Because you cannot sit a German Shepherd down in the kitchen and verbally explain why chewing on the television remote is a bad financial decision.
You really can't, even though they give you that intense, tilted head look when you try.
They do try to understand.
They do.
Yeah.
But for a long time, the assumption was just that you couldn't bridge that gap. Because of the language barrier, human parenting styles just seemed irrelevant to pets.
Right.
But then a group of researchers published this fascinating study back in 2018. They actually took established child parenting questionnaires and painstakingly adapted them for dog guardians.
And it was a massive leap in how we study the human-animal bond.
Yeah.
Because the researchers realized that reasoning doesn't require a verbal debate. For a nonverbal animal, reasoning and responsiveness translate into how accurately you read their body language,
Okay, that makes sense.
and how thoughtfully you structure their physical environment, and how you react to their species-specific behaviors.
So it's about speaking their language, essentially.
Exactly. And through these adapted surveys, they found that dog owners naturally separate into 3 distinct styles.
Okay, so the first one maps perfectly onto that dictator boss we just talked about, right?
Yes, the authoritarian dog parent.
This approach is intensely correction-focused. Like, if the dog steps out of line, the immediate response is telling the dog off, yelling, or using physical aversive methods.
Yeah, the entire relationship is built on punishing the wrong choices until the dog simply stops making them.
Which sounds miserable. But then the researchers looked at the gold standard authoritative style and found that in the dog world, it actually splits into 2 complementary dimensions.
Yes, the first is called the authoritative intrinsic value approach.
Intrinsic value. I love that term.
It's great. Guardians who score high here recognize that the dog has inherent worth just by being a dog.
Right.
They pay intense attention to the animal's individual preferences. Like, they know exactly which texture of toy their dog likes, where they prefer to be scratched, and they actively give the dog choices throughout the day.
Which is so important. But the most controversial aspect of this intrinsic value style is how these owners handle negative emotions, right?
Yes, it is.
Because it specifically includes behaviors like allowing the dog to growl if it is upset.
Yep.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I know if you were listening to this while walking your dog right now, you might have just stopped in your tracks.
You're probably thinking we're crazy.
Seriously. We are taught by almost every conventional training metric that a growling dog is a dangerous dog. The advice is always to shut that behavior down immediately so they learn they can't be aggressive.
Right.
So wait, shouldn't we stop a dog from growling? Isn't it a massive safety risk to just, let them do it?
I know. It feels completely counterintuitive because we view growling through a human lens of aggression.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the mechanical function of the behavior. Growling is not violence. Growling is distance-increasing communication.
Distance-increasing communication. Wow.
It is a dog's only natural way of saying, I am overwhelmed, I am in pain, or I am terrified, and I need you to give me space.
Okay, wow.
An authoritative pet parent reads that body language and recognizes it as communication, not defiance.
So if you use an authoritarian response and punish the growl...
You haven't made the dog less scared. You have just silenced their early warning system.
Oh my gosh. So the dog is still completely terrified of whatever is happening, but now they know they aren't allowed to communicate that fear to you.
Exactly. And that is
What?
precisely the psychological mechanism that leads to a dog biting seemingly out of nowhere.
Because they didn't bite out of nowhere.
Right. We just punish them for trying to give us the warning signs, validating the dog's feelings, respecting their intrinsic value by backing off when they growl, and then working to address the root cause of their fear.
That is what high responsiveness looks like in practice.
Exactly.
Wow. That completely flips the script on discipline. Instead of reacting with like, how dare you growl at me, the mindset shifts to, thank you for telling me you're overwhelmed.
You are managing the emotional state, not just policing the noise.
That's incredible.
And managing that emotional state flows directly into the third style the researchers identified, the authoritative training-oriented approach.
Right.
This is where the demandingness, the structure, comes back into play.
Yeah.
Having intrinsic value for your dog doesn't mean letting them run feral.
Right. There are still rules.
Yes, these guardians actively teach behaviors and set boundaries, but they do it by using positive reinforcement.
Okay, I want to make sure the mechanics of this make sense because it's really easy to throw around the phrase positive reinforcement.
Sure.
Let's say a dog has a habit of jumping on guests when they walk through the front door.
Okay, classic problem.
Right. An authoritarian parent might, knee the dog in the chest or yank a leash to stop the jumping. But how does an authoritative, training-oriented parent handle that while still maintaining demandingness?
Well, an authoritative parent still demands that the dog doesn't jump on the guest. The rule remains firm, but the mechanism for achieving it changes. Instead of waiting for the dog to make a mistake and punishing it, the authoritative parent proactively asks the dog to perform an incompatible behavior.
Like sitting on a mat.
Exactly, sitting on a mat, and then they massively reward them for that choice. They set the dog up to succeed rather than setting them up to fail and then correcting them.
I get the theory and the empathy behind it makes a lot of sense, but I can imagine someone being a little skeptical here.
Yeah, definitely.
It's one thing to say we should treat our dogs with intrinsic value, but does this actually result in a better behaved animal? Or does it just create a spoiled pet that gets too many treats? What does the data actually say about the outcomes?
Well, the researchers wanted to answer that exact question. So moving beyond just surveys, they conducted a follow-up study focusing on real-world observation.
Okay.
They designed a walk test. They had owners walk their dogs through a specific environment that was intentionally littered with distractions.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Strange people walking past, sudden noises, intriguing smells on the ground. The goal was to see if the parenting style dictated how the human and the dog reacted under mild stress.
And picture that setup, like we've all been on a frustrating walk where the dog is pulling toward a squirrel or hyperfixating on a discarded sandwich wrapper.
Oh, yeah. And the contrast during the walk test was stark. Authoritarian owners reacted to distractions by immediately tightening the leash, issuing harsh verbal corrections, and physically pulling the dog away.
So their baseline was just tension.
Complete tension. Authoritative owners, however, navigated the exact same distractions, using cheerful, high-pitched vocal cues to recall their dog's attention, offering treats, and guiding the dog through the environment.
And it isn't just about the human's behavior on the walk, right? The dogs themselves are fundamentally shaped by this over time.
Absolutely.
Because the most compelling evidence comes from a recent 2023 study. They evaluated dogs living with authoritative guardians and found they have a significantly more secure attachment to their humans.
Yeah.
They scored much higher on sociability metrics. But the detail that really blew my mind was that these authoritative dogs actually scored higher on measures of independent problem solving.
What's fascinating here is the underlying cognitive mechanism. Like, why would the way you speak to your dog on a walk make them better at figuring out how to get a treat out of a complex puzzle box?
Right.
The answer is psychological safety.
Wow.
In an authoritarian environment, the dog learns that making the wrong choice results in punishment, yelling, or physical discomfort. Over time, that animal becomes terrified of making a mistake.
So when they are presented with a novel problem,
Their safest bet is to do absolutely nothing. They freeze. They wait for a command because initiative is dangerous.
but in an authoritative environment where the owner uses positive reinforcement and encourages the dog to make choices, the dog learns that experimentation is safe.
Exactly. They feel secure enough to try opening the puzzle box, to fail, and to try a different angle without that paralyzing fear of a leash correction.
That makes perfect sense.
The absence of fear literally expands their cognitive flexibility and makes them more intelligent problem solvers.
That is just incredible. Psychological safety unlocks intelligence. Now, here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because if you share your home with a cat, you might be wondering how this applies to felines, since they aren't exactly known for their desperate desire to please us.
That is putting it mildly.
Right. But the research covers cats, too. A fascinating study examined the relationship between human personality types, which heavily dictate our baseline parenting styles, and cat behavior.
Yeah.
They found that a guardian's high neuroticism is explicitly linked to increased measurable behavior issues in their cat.
Cats are incredibly sensitive barometers for environmental shifts.
Oh, complete.
This study really highlights the reality of emotional contagion. Neuroticism in humans often manifests as being highly stressed, reactive, and, inconsistent. One day you might ignore the cat on the counter. The next day you might yell and spray them with a water bottle because you are stressed about work. That inconsistency creates a highly unpredictable environment.
So if I am hyperventilating and stressed out because I think my cat is going to scratch my expensive new living room sofa,
Yeah.
my own erratic, panicky energy is essentially ensuring that the cat's stress levels spike,
Exactly.
which leads to them destroying the sofa. It is a completely self-fulfilling prophecy.
The cat absorbs that ambient chaos. Their baseline cortisol levels rise, and they reflect that internal stress outward through behaviors we label as bad.
Like scratching furniture, urinating outside the litter box, or sudden aggression.
Right. Conversely, the study found that when a guardian scores high in agreeableness,
Mhm.
providing a calm, predictable, authoritative environment where the cat has choices and autonomy.
Your stress plummets.
Exactly. They exhibit better overall well-being, and owner satisfaction goes through the roof.
Which means if your cat is suddenly acting out, before you start buying expensive deterrent sprays, the very first place you might need to look is in the mirror,
Yep.
at your own stress levels and your own consistency.
That realization bridges the gap between these theoretical studies and our daily lives. The most profound value of understanding your pet parenting style is that it gives us a much clearer framework for evaluating the training tools we use.
Oh, absolutely.
The pet industry is flooded with debates about tools, clickers versus spray bottles, treats versus prong collars. But when you look at it through the lens of developmental psychology, the debate ends.
Because the science is definitive.
Yep.
There was a major review back in 2017 that compiled extensive data on training methods.
Yes.
And aversive tools, whether that means yelling, shock collars, prong collars, leash jerks for dogs, or, throwing things and spraying water at cats.
They all fall squarely under the authoritarian umbrella. You are relying on fear and physical discomfort to force compliance.
And the findings in that review are just stark.
Yep.
Aversive methods are consistently associated with increased fear, chronic anxiety, heightened stress, and escalated aggression.
And most importantly, they deeply damage the human-animal bond. An animal trained with aversive tools might look perfectly obedient to an untrained observer.
Right.
But internally, that animal is operating in a state of chronic distress. They aren't behaving because they trust you. They are behaving because they are afraid of what you will do to them if they don't.
So what does this all mean for you? It means translating this psychology into actionable changes tomorrow morning.
Okay.
It means observing your pet not as a subordinate animal that needs to be dominated, but as a complex companion whose needs you are actively trying to decode.
Exactly.
It means taking the spray bottles and throwing them in the trash. It means taking off the prong collars. It means tossing out this outdated, debunked idea that you have to act like the alpha wolf of your living room.
Thank goodness.
And practically, if you are currently struggling with behavior, like if your dog lunges at other dogs on a walk or your cat is terrorizing your guests,
You should seek out a reward-based professional. Look for a certified trainer or behaviorist who explicitly operates from an authoritative, positive reinforcement mindset. If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Hmm.
shifting away from authoritarian control isn't just an act of charity toward your pet.
No.
It is a massive investment in your own quality of life. The data continually reinforces that authoritative pet parents live with animals that have significantly fewer behavioral issues.
Which means less chaos in your home.
Exactly. You aren't constantly managing crises, you aren't yelling, and you are free from the heavy guilt of physically punishing an animal that you genuinely love.
Yeah.
By raising your responsiveness to their needs, they become remarkably easier and much more joyful to live with. It creates a reciprocal cycle of well-being.
It really is the ultimate win-win scenario. We started this deep dive looking at how the clinical frameworks we use to raise human children could possibly apply to our pets. And what the data reveals is that whether you are dealing with a human toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store or a terrier barking out the front window at the mail carrier, the universal language of success remains exactly the same.
Kindness paired with firm boundaries.
High demandingness, high responsiveness.
Empathy and structure are effective across species lines. By choosing to be a responsive coach rather than a rigid dictator, you don't just unlock better behavior.
Yeah.
You unlock a deeper, infinitely more secure bond with the animals that share your life.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to mull over.
Okay.
We've seen how our individual daily parenting styles can fundamentally shape our pets' sociability, lower their anxiety levels, and even unlock their cognitive problem-solving skills.
Right.
So if millions of individual households are currently shifting their approach, if we are collectively raising a generation of highly emotional, deeply bonded, and sometimes anxious animals, What does the collective personality of today's pets say about us?
Well,
Right. How much have our own societal views on empathy, control, and what it truly means to care for another living being shifted over the last few decades? Are our pets simply holding up a mirror to our own evolving humanity?
That is a fascinating thought.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Go look at your furry best friend a little differently today, maybe give them an extra choice or two, and we'll catch you next time.